Blog Talk Radio.
You are listening to the Pro Football Podcast Daily here on Blog Talk Radio. Here is your host, Mike Noto.
And welcome to episode 3 of the Pro Football Podcast. I'm your host, Mike Noto, as always, coming at you every Monday through Friday evenings here on Blog Talk Radio. Feel free to join in the conversation by either calling in our live call line, hitting me up on Twitter at ProFootballPod, that's ProFootballPod, or catch me on email too at profootballpodcast@gmail.com. In our kickoff segment today, I'm pleased to announce we have Bruce Raffel from the website BaltimoreBeatdown.com. He covers all things Ravens on his website. You can also catch him on Twitter at BaltimoreBeatDO. That's BaltimoreBeatDO. And I'm pleased to welcome Bruce to the show. How you doing, Bruce?
Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Hey, no problem, Bruce. Hey, Bruce, I know you guys are all over the latest Ravens news there on your Baltimore Beatdown site. And, the Ravens were in the news yesterday. They traded for AQ Shipley, a center previously with the Colts. They trade him. They trade a conditional pick to Indianapolis for Shipley. What are your thoughts on that deal?
Well, I think Shipley was brought in to really bolster from a competition standpoint. Following the retirement of Matt Burke, who was a fixture there, after leaving Minnesota after so many years. Burke was not only a good player, but obviously he was a mentor. The Ravens also drafted prior to this year in 2012 Gino Gradkowski, same school, Delaware, as Joe Flacco, and the expectation was that he will be the heir apparent. But there may be a question about that because not only did they draft a center by the name of Ryan Jensen in the draft, who could also play a couple other positions on the line, they brought in Shipley as well, who has actually a lot more experience than any of these guys. Having started 5 games last year for the Indianapolis Colts.
Yeah, I can tell you by reading Colts blogs, Colts writers, that they are pretty much up in arms with this trade, not understanding it whatsoever because he was a more cost-effective option than Samson Satele, and a lot of people thought a better player. Now, what I also want to touch base with you on, Bruce, here was the Ravens draft. And what kind of impact do you think the rookies will have in 2013, specifically Arthur Brown, Brandon Williams, and Matt Elam?
Well, in the past, everyone says that the Ravens are one of these classic teams that drafts best player available regardless of position. And I think the Ravens would probably, look you in the eye right now and say we still drafted the best player available. They just happen to be in the positions of need. But to me, I think the Ravens basically looked at the guys that they wanted in the positions of need and then drafted the best player at that position. They got this guy, Matt Elam, in the first round, who is not only a first-round talent. This guy is probably one of and may actually end up being the best safety of all that was drafted. The guy has an absolute nose for the ball. He's a hard hitter. He's extremely dedicated. He's a leader. And on top of it, he's an excellent cover safety, which is something we didn't have. He'll be probably starting from day one at the strong safety position next to Michael Huff, who the Ravens got as a free agent from previously with the Oakland Raiders. He obviously is not as polished NFL as Bernard Pollard was, and Pollard, of course, was so well known for laying the wood on opponents. But I think Elam is only a notch behind that. But on top of that, I think Elam brings to the table what Pollard doesn't have, specifically the ability to cover in pass coverage. As far as Arthur Brown, Brown's a relatively undersized inside linebacker, but you look at the tape and you see him shedding blocks of big, strong offensive linemen. And the Ravens put a couple guys in the middle, Haloti Ngata, and whether it be Terrence Cody or Brandon Williams, who I'll get to in a second. And those guys are going to eat up a lot of space to allow Arthur Brown, who is extremely quick, side to side like a young Ray Lewis was. And I think you're going to have a guy who's going to be a very big impact player. Fans on readers of the Baltimore Beatdown were clamoring for the Ravens to trade up because there was a concern that Brown would go somewhere around 15th, 20th in the draft, and here he was, last until the second round.
Absolutely. Very surprised that teams didn't jump on Brown. He's a guy, I also have a YouTube channel that I talk sports on, and he was a guy I thought would never last past the Packers at 26, but he did, and again, just a wonderful pick, I think, by the Ravens. Now, as far as, for the rest of this episode, I'm going to be doing players I feel have the most pressure on them heading into the 2013 season from each team. From a Ravens perspective, who do you think is the player that has the most pressure to perform next year?
Well, to me, that has to be an obvious answer. And how can you call out anybody on the team other than Joe Flacco? Here's a guy who got paid at that time the highest contract in the history of the league. And if you want to look at his postseason success in 2013, you can't argue that he deserved that. On the other hand, is he in the class of a Peyton Manning, Tom Brady, Drew Brees, Aaron Rodgers? That remains to be seen. But at $120 million, even though he's a very cap-friendly salary in 2013, the team obviously had to shed certain salaries, knowing that going forward his salary is just going to go through the ceiling over the next couple of years, and he probably won't see all 6 years of that salary, at least the way it's currently structured. So here's a guy who's going to have to put up or shut up in the sense that is that postseason success an aberration, or is that the Joe Flacco that we're going to see going forward? He lost Anquan Bolden. The defense is not quite what it was in previous years. They were only ranked middle of the pack. I think they were ranked 17th overall. So there's a lot on his shoulders just to take that success in the playoffs and continue it into the regular season, and we'll see that right off the bat in Game 1.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more, Bruce. As a matter of fact, with Joe Flacco trying to develop that regular season consistency that he somewhat lacked here during his career, and following up that brilliant playoff performance from last year, of course. We transferred from Joe Flacco to a guy that was once a very big critic of Joe Flacco in former Ravens free safety Ed Reed. And Ed Reed recently had hip surgery shortly after joining his new team, the Houston Texans, and signing a shiny new 3-year deal. The owner of the Texans, as well as defensive coordinator Wade Phillips, came out. We're pretty concerned by that, as I think they should be, considering the guy just signed a contract with them this offseason, and I know they were expecting him to be healthy. There were some rumors that maybe the Ravens weren't interested in signing him at all anyway. In your opinion, do you think Baltimore got rid of Ed Reed just in time?
Well, I think that the Ravens actually wanted Reed back, as it got closer to the time that he did sign with the Texans. And there was talk, that they wanted to get another year out of him, probably more so for his leadership ability than for his actual performance on the field. The way he played last year is he wasn't much of a tackler. He usually, put his shoulder into a guy hoping to knock him down. He did a lot of arm tackling, holding the player up so his teammates could get there. He was a step slow in coverage. He is the type of guy who took risks, and sometimes that backfired on him. But, of course, he still will go down as probably the greatest center fielder, on a defensive side of the football. And in addition to the way that he watched tape and mentored these younger players, he was the type of guy that opponents basically looked to see where he was playing and then threw to the other side of the field. So maybe he didn't make the plays, but he also caused offenses of the opposition to look at different areas of the field other than where he was playing. Quarterbacks from on other teams would line up, and they'd look for two guys on the Ravens defense. They want to find out where number 52 is playing, Ray Lewis, and they want to find out where number 20, Ed Reed, was playing. So the fact that we brought in a Michael Huff, who is a hard hitter, he's younger, he can play cornerback. He started most of the season for Oakland last year. Cornerback shows that now we have two safeties that are actually much better in pass coverage than the previous ones that we did. And you combine it with some of the other changes and some of the beef that the Ravens added to the offensive line with Marcus Spears and Chris Canty, drafting Brandon Williams, who I've never seen a guy with biceps the size as him, much less a guy who could actually walk around on his hands like you may have seen in one of his YouTube videos. And I think the Ravens defense could easily be a better defense than it was in 2012.
No, I think you bring up some very interesting points there. And, man, you are all over the Ravens. You're like a Ravens encyclopedia, man. I love it. You spoke about some Ravens legends, certainly, when you mentioned Ed Reed and also Ray Lewis. And it kind of gets me to thinking, Pro Football Talk is doing a Mount Rushmore for each NFL team to sort of letting the fans sound off. If you had to pick your Ravens Mount Rushmore, who would be on there?
Well, the funny thing, if you and I had this conversation a year ago, and then we're having it now as we are, we probably have to really get a lot of dynamite to get all those faces off of Mount Rushmore, with losing Ed Reed, with losing Ray Lewis, with Anquan Bolden going and Matt Burke retiring, you can just keep on going and probably knock off 3 or 4 other guys that were on this team last year and made major contributors, including 6 out of the 11 starters on defense, you see a huge change. But to me, it's relatively obvious when you look at the veterans on this team on both sides of the ball. You've got to put Flacco on there on the offense, and you've got to put Ray Rice up there from the offense too, because as these two guys go, will determine this team. Someone like Torrey Smith is probably going to have a huge role, and I expect him to move into that so-called number one receiver slot if there is such thing as a number one receiver in the NFL. But here's a guy who proved that he's more than just a straight line, long distance, throw the ball and I'll run under it type of guy. On defense, you lost those veterans that we just talked about, but there were 2 key ones that should have a lot to do with that. And I'm not going to put Elvis Dumervil up on our Mount Rushmore before he takes a snap with his hand in the dirt yet. So I'd put Haloti Ngata and Terrell Suggs, 2 big guys, all-pro, candidates for Defensive Player of the Year in Ngata and actual NFL Defensive Player of the Year of Suggs, who's definitely going to benefit with Elvis Dumervil on the other side of the ball. So if you look at those 2 guys on offense and 2 guys on defense, that's a pretty impressive Mount Rushmore for the Ravens.
And you bring up a good point there, Bruce. I'm really intrigued to see how that Dumervil, Suggs, pass rush duo does their first year in Baltimore. And Bruce, I'd like to thank you for coming on tonight and taking time out of, I know your busy schedule there, keeping up with all the Ravens news on BaltimoreBeatdown.com. And remember, guys, you can catch Bruce on BaltimoreBeatdown.com and on Twitter at BaltimoreBeatDO. BaltimoreBeatDO. Bruce, thanks again, man, and keep up the great work, and have a nice night, okay, man?
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Hey, no problem. Thank you again, Bruce.
Bye-bye.
Okay, again, that was Bruce Raffel from BaltimoreBeatdown.com. Just a wonderful site he runs over there, along with the other contributors on the website. And I definitely urge you guys to go check it out here. And as I alluded with Bruce in the interview, tonight I'm going to address all 32 teams and the guy I think going into next season has the most to prove. And we're going to go team by team here. Some guys are obvious from each team. Some guys I went a little bit out of the box. Some teams I picked a group of players, maybe even a coach or two in there to sort of dissect what I think the proper answer to that question is for each team. And we start off with the Buffalo Bills. And the Buffalo Bills, you can go a lot of ways with this, right? You can go Mario Williams, who underachieved his first year in Buffalo, or you can go the way I did with C.J. Spiller, the running back, splitting time during the first part of his career with Fred Jackson. You can sort of see the writing on the wall that Spiller will be the featured, maybe not only running back, but featured player in Doug Marrone's new offense. They're ushering in a new regime at quarterback with Fitzpatrick exiting, Manuel now presumably going to start from day one. And, does C.J. Spiller take the next step? Does he meet the potential that a lot of writers, a lot of bloggers, a lot of fantasy experts think he can achieve? I think the sky is the limit for this guy, and he's going to get a lot of touches this year in lieu of the rookie starting quarterback, and we'll see how he does with that. But again, C.J. Spiller, my player with the most to prove for the Bills. The Dolphins, I think their players who have the most to prove are twofold. I think Tannehill's the obvious one, Ryan Tannehill, the second-year quarterback, and also their running backs, Lamar Miller and Daniel Thomas. And you may say, why those 3? Well, I think it's pretty simple. They upgraded a lot of elements of their team, whether it was the defensive side of the ball, whether it was with Mike Wallace, Donnell Ellerbe certainly at the linebacker spot, Dustin Keller at the tight end spot, 2 places where they didn't really go out and try to get more help was the quarterback and running back position. And look, this team is now geared towards winning next year. They're not a team building for the future, all right? And they have young guys here at the quarterback and running back position. A young quarterback's best friend is a steady running game. Between the running backs for the Dolphins and that offensive line, are they going to be able to provide Tannehill with a running game to keep defenses honest so he can improve here in his sophomore season? And can Tannehill himself avoid that sophomore slump? Those 3, the most to prove for the Miami Dolphins. For the New York Jets, the guy with the most to prove is Mark Sanchez. I think that's pretty obvious. He's probably playing for his career. And what I mean by that is, if he falls flat on his face this year, will he never be on an NFL team again? No, I don't think it's that severe. I think even if he has a dreadful year this year, he'll still latch on as a backup somewhere in the league. But what I mean he's playing for his career is this is probably going to be his last chance to have a lockdown starter's job in the NFL with a team in a big market, with a team that drafted him in the top 5, and to be a serious black mark on his career if the same team that drafted him 5th overall and traded up 20 spots to do it, 5 years later was releasing him. And I look for him to come out motivated in camp. I think he's eventually going to be your starting quarterback for the New York Jets, and we'll see what he does. For the New England Patriots, I look at their whole defense as being the group, the players with the most to prove coming into this year. Now, how many years are we going to have a situation where this Patriots offense and Tom Brady has to stand on its head every time to get this team a win? It seems like the time Tom Brady doesn't have a good game in the playoffs is the time where this Patriots defense shows their flaws, like they did last year against the Ravens. They're exposed, and the Patriots lose a playoff game. The Patriots now have a nice blend of veterans on defense and younger players sort of on the come, right? They have Gerard Mayo, who's a veteran. They added Adrian Wilson, who's a veteran. They have young guys in Chandler Jones, Dante Hightower, players like this who need to gel together and prove that they're a defense that can be a serious complement to Tom Brady. Because let's face it, they spent more money or made more of a commitment, it seemed, to the defensive side of the ball this year, re-signing Talib, going out and getting Wilson, than they did on the offensive side of the ball, where pretty much the only marquee move they made was bringing in Danny Amendola. Moving from the AFC East players with the most to prove to the NFC North, I mean, we had Bruce cover the Ravens in his interview at the top of the show, and he absolutely nailed it with Joe Flacco. So, I'll leave that for the Ravens because he did an excellent job. The Steelers, I think the guy with the most to prove in that organization is Todd Haley, the offensive coordinator. Todd Haley's a guy who, from all accounts, has pretty much worn out his welcome every place he's been, whether it's been as a coordinator or a head coach. He came in last year, and there's rumors of tension between him and Roethlisberger. Maybe Mike Wallace didn't like the way things were being done there, which made his decision to leave all that much easier. Whatever the situation was, you have Todd Haley, who has a quarterback here who's won 2 Super Bowls, who had success with previous offensive coordinators, mainly Bruce Arians, who we now know went to Indy and then down, now the head coach for the Arizona Cardinals. Can Haley develop an offense to accentuate Roethlisberger's strengths, and most importantly, can he get a nice running game back, something that lacked for the Steelers last year? And with the drafting of Le'Veon Bell, and they still have Isaac Redman and Jonathan Dwyer down there as well. Can they revamp that running game and put Roethlisberger in situations where he can be the Roethlisberger of old? For the Cleveland Browns, their player with the most to prove, I feel, is Trent Richardson. I think Brandon Weeden is just a sitting duck, basically. He's not going to be the quarterback of the future. If you're Rob Chudzinski, if you're Joe Banner, you didn't take a job with a professional football team and say, man, I'm taking this job because Brandon Weeden's my quarterback. Absolutely not. So I think Brandon Weeden, outside of having a sensational season, won't even be the quarterback next year. I think Trent Richardson has the most to prove because, look, this is a guy who much is expected of. He's the best player on their offense. He's probably the most talented player on their team. He's obviously not the best player on their team right now, and they have Joe Thomas and Joe Hayden as well. But in order for this offense to have success, they need to get more than they got out of Trent Richardson last year. Now, Trent Richardson had a good year for a rookie year. I'm not saying that. But let's see if Trent Richardson, the 3rd pick overall in the draft last year behind Andrew Luck and RG3, let's see if he can take it to that next level as a running back. The last team in the AFC North here is the Cincinnati Bengals. Andy Dalton is my guy with the most to prove. And why do I say that? Even though I think Dalton has exceeded expectations, getting the Bengals to the playoffs in his first 2 seasons, I say that because now I think it's on Dalton and that offense, because they have a good defense, they have a good pass rush, get to the playoffs, win a game. Okay, you've gotten to the playoffs 2 years in a row. You've lost 2 years in a row. Let's see you get there now and win a playoff game. Whether that playoff game is a wild card game on the road, whether it's a a game at home, okay, because they happen to win a division or something like that. Get a win in the playoffs for Andy Dalton and the Cincinnati Bengals. Moving now to the AFC South. First, I'll discuss the Tennessee Titans. And for me, the guy with the most to prove is Chris Johnson. And a guy who's rushed for 2,000 yards, you say, what does he have to prove? I think he has to prove that, hey, I got my big money contract. I'm still motivated to be the best. Now I'm motivated to rush for 1,000 yards, which I don't think is that much of a feat if you're a feature running back on a team anymore. I'm not motivated to rush for 1,000 yards. I'm Chris Johnson. I'm motivated to be better than Adrian Peterson this year because I get paid like a guy who's in an upper echelon of backs in the league. He has no more excuses. He has two stud guards in Cooper and obviously Andy Levitre, who they paid big money to via free agency. They have a better blocking tight end now in Delaney Walker. They have a guy to spell him in short yardage situations in a Sean Green. So you should have a Chris Johnson at an optimum energy level, running behind a good offensive line, and we'll see how healthy he comes into camp, how good a shape he comes into camp, and if he can sort of recoup some of that explosiveness that he had during that 2,000-yard season. For the Houston Texans, in my mind, still the best team in this division. The player with the most to prove is Matt Schaub. Matt Schaub is I would say a little bit above average quarterback in the NFL. I think he's a step above average to above average, sort of in that intermediary there. And he didn't play like it last year. And maybe that was due to a lack of weapons. But this year, look, they have Arian Foster, who's arguably the best all-around running back in the league. Andre Johnson is still ticking. All right, they have a good enough defense, certainly, to win. Just as good a defense as the other top contenders in the AFC. Can Matt Schaub become more consistent? Because you have these games from Schaub where he absolutely goes off, right? Like the Lions Thanksgiving Day game last year. And then you have a clunker of a performance that sort of makes you shake your head. Develops consistency from Matt Schaub. He's a seasoned veteran. And let's see if he can get that Houston Texans team to win not only one playoff game, but get themselves to the AFC Championship game. The Jacksonville Jaguars are next. And look, Blaine Gabbert has a lot to prove. Blaine Gabbert is sort of in the same situation as a Brandon Weeden. Obviously, he's just a little bit younger, and he was a little bit higher of a pick. So I think that the Jaguars will give him an honest shot to be their long-term quarterback. And, from the 24 games he's played so far in his career, I'm very underwhelmed. I don't know about you. I don't know if I'm missing something on this guy. I don't think he's a bad guy. But between the injury last year, the inconsistent play when he is on the field, right now he's not a guy that I have any confidence in is going to be the future of my team. So a lot to prove this year for Blaine Gabbert. For the Indianapolis Colts, I think the player with the most to prove is Andrew Luck. And, again, he was stellar last year. But I like to see Andrew Luck prove that he can develop a little bit more consistency, shrink that, have a more disparage between the touchdowns he threw and interceptions, right? Get better in that department, and see if he can be this guy who doesn't have that sophomore slump. We've seen quarterbacks have good rookie years before. How does he follow it up? His team totally exceeded expectations last year, going 11-5 and earning a wild card berth. Is there a little bit of a letdown, a little bit of an exhale, or does he keep on charging right through and have another stellar season with the Colts? I really would have liked to see them get him another weapon in the offseason via free agency and the draft. I think they're rolling the dice a little bit, expecting that much out of Reggie Wayne again, but we'll see. But Andrew Luck, something to prove in 2013. The last division here in the AFC, discussing what players have to prove next year. The Kansas City Chiefs, I think everything starts with Alex Smith on that team. Alex Smith has a lot to prove. Why? Because he's a guy who had little or no success his first 5-6 years in the league. He gets a coach in like Jim Harbaugh, sort of adjusts the way he plays, has him go to a low-risk offense. Smith flourishes in that offense, having one of the highest quarterback ratings while he was under Harbaugh as a player. Gets hurt last year, gets supplanted by Colin Kaepernick, and the rest, as they say, is history. And he ends up in Kansas City for a second-round pick and a and a conditional pick next year, which could be another second-round pick. And, look, that's a lot to give up for a quarterback, especially a quarterback who was drafted in 2005, who's entering his 7th, 8th year in the league. Can he prove that trade was worth it, that the Chiefs got the best quarterback in the offseason by making that trade for Alex Smith? As far as the Chargers go, I think it's put up or shut up time for Ryan Mathews. He is, I have never owned him in fantasy. Thank God I've stayed away from him. But he has to be the most frustrating player to own in fantasy football, and he also has to be one of the most frustrating players to watch in person. Now, when he was drafted, he had the unenviable task of immediately being compared to LaDainian Tomlinson. I said it when he was drafted. Those are completely unfair comparisons. They're not even the same kind of back as we're seeing sort of play out here at the beginning of Mathews' career. I think, the team would love, since they did draft him and did tout him, although this is not the same regime, they're going to give him a shot here. But remember, this is not the regime that drafted him. So if he doesn't produce this year, you may have a new running back in San Diego. As far as the Raiders go, I think that this one's pretty obvious as well. A lot of these teams have quarterbacks with something to prove, and I think the Raiders have one too in Matt Flynn. Matt Flynn, of course, went to the Seahawks last year as a free agent, was supplanted in training camp by Russell Wilson, never saw the field as a starter last year for the Seahawks, gets traded this offseason to the Raiders. Reggie McKenzie, the GM with the Raiders, was with Green Bay, and that's the connection there. He obviously thinks highly of Matt Flynn. He's certainly better than the other options they had at quarterback, when you think of a guy like a Terrell Pryor, for instance. But what is Matt Flynn? We don't know. It's like the great unknown with that guy. He had the one good game against New England towards the end of the year that year in Green Bay, and that's pretty much the sample size we have. And I think the mystery surrounding Matt Flynn keeps on getting him these opportunities to prove what he has. The Broncos, I think the guy with the most to prove is Raheem Moore, the safety last year who had that infamous pass sail over his head to Jacoby Jones, the 70-yard touchdown pass at the end of regulation. And look, I wasn't one who piled on Moore after the play. I can certainly understand Broncos fans being upset at the guy, though. I'm not saying that at all. But let's see how he bounces back. He obviously has a lot to prove that, not really to me, to Broncos fans, but to himself and to his team, that, for himself, that he can bounce back from something like this, something on the field that was probably the toughest thing he's ever had to deal with. And also to his teammates that, hey, look, he apologized profusely. Now he's going to come, back it up, and put that behind him and have a stellar season for the Broncos, who have serious high hopes, obviously, as the odds-on favorite in the AFC. Now, moving from the AFC players with the most to prove to the NFC players, let's take the NFC East first, and we'll start off with the New York Football Giants. Ahmad Bradshaw, their longtime running back, two-time Super Bowl champion running back, was released earlier this offseason. And it's going to be up to the combination mainly of David Wilson and Andre Brown to fill those shoes. And we'll see how, when thrusted into the spotlight role, because even though Williams and Brown showed flashes last year, they certainly were not the marquee guy, were not the guy everyone was game planning for. Wilson, a speedster, Brown more of a rough and rugged sort of back. We'll see how they perform here, and they have a lot to prove to sort of set up that play-action passing game that Eli Manning used so well when he had guys like Ahmad Bradshaw and, of course, Brandon Jacobs keeping the defenses honest. The Dallas Cowboys, the player with the most to prove on their team is the player that seems like he's had the most to prove for the past 5 or 6 years for this team, and that's quarterback Tony Romo. He probably had the most to prove before he signed that gigantic contract and before he got called out by his owner basically saying, Jerry Jones, that he needs to spend more time at the facility and be more like Peyton Manning. I mean, can his own owner put any more pressure on this guy? The contract already did it enough. And now Tony Romo comes into this year. In the draft, they did nothing but fortify the offense. They took a center in the first round. They took, of course, a tight end in the draft. They took a wide receiver in the draft. So, look, they're giving Romo, or they think they're giving Romo, the tools around him to succeed, and we'll see if he can finally get over that hump. I'm sure this is a subject we'll revisit in November or December, certainly. The Washington Redskins, the guy with the most to prove is RG3, and only that, so the only thing he has to prove is that he can come back from this injury as the vintage RG3. And you guys probably, if you listen to my YouTube channel, know my thoughts on the fact that Washington is still going to play with a grass field rather than going to field turf, which I think is absolutely ridiculous, and I think is going to be a big factor in the health of RG3 long term. But look, he's going to come back. We'll see if he's the vintage RG3. I certainly hope he is. I certainly hope Shanahan develops more of the offense to center around him in the pocket and thinks about RG3's long-term NFL career rather than his own, because I think it's a selfish move on the Shanahan's part when they have him doing all these planned runs to win now, when his development would be better suited if they scripted more plays to leave him in the pocket. The last team in the NFC East, of course, is the Philadelphia Eagles. And the guy with the most to prove there is Chip Kelly. I mean, he's coming into the league presumably with an offense that is different than anyone's ever seen before, one that had much success in college, one that has the city of Philadelphia buzzing and the NFL circles buzzing in. What is he going to come out and do? Is he going to be the guy this year that gives us the wrinkles we've never seen and we'll have to play catch-up to Chip Kelly? Or is he going to be another Steve Spurrier type where he just won't have the athletes that he had in college and he won't have the talent differential that he had in college either? It remains to be seen. And while I think Chip Kelly will have more success than Spurrier, I think he's a little bit more of a well-rounded offensive coach, it still remains to be seen whether NFL players can fit into that system he ran at Oregon or a system like he ran at the University of Oregon. NFC East all set. Now to the NFC South. And we'll start with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. For months on my YouTube channel, which is Sports News Analysis, if you guys are not yet subscribed, I have over 750 subscribers now, so be sure to check it out. That's Sports News Analysis. On that channel, I've been saying for months that the Buccaneers have made all these moves the last two off seasons. Between picking up Vincent Jackson last year, making the improvements on the offensive line this year, signing Deshaun Goldson, of course, trading for Darrelle Revis, drafting Jonathan Banks to shore up that secondary. And the one position I see a gaping hole in for the Buccaneers is the quarterback position. I don't think Josh Freeman is that good, to really put it in plain English. And, I wasn't surprised that they drafted Mike Glennon in the third round because I think, again, this is not the regime that drafted, or not the head coach that drafted Josh Freeman. So maybe he's not enamored with Josh Freeman, but I think Freeman gets the year this year to be the quarterback. His rookie contract is up this year, which is big. If he performs well, he'll get an extension, I think. If he doesn't perform well, I think you see them move on from Josh Freeman. So a lot of pressure on him this year. For the Saints coming off Bountygate, Sean Payton crossed my mind as a guy with a lot to prove. But then as I sort of went down the people in their organization, players and coaches, I came to Rob Ryan. Rob Ryan is a very polarizing figure in the NFL. On one hand, fans, writers, media types are a little bit annoyed with him at times, I think, because he's a guy they always show on the sidelines, moments where he's emotional, and he comes off pretty bad. But if you notice, whenever Rob Ryan is unemployed, he always finds a job. He even made reference to that when he got fired this year. So I think he has a lot to prove from the perspective of he's never inherited a good defense. He still is not inheriting a good defense with the Saints. But let's see him get the Saints in the top 10 defensively in points or yardage allowed or what have you. Because, the knock on him is, well, he gets bad defenses to the middle of the pack but never exceeds that. And while I think that's a serious accomplishment, I kind of disagree with people on that. I think to prove all the doubters wrong, he's got to develop a defense in the next 2 years, and that starts this year in New Orleans, where he has a solid top 10 defense. The Panthers guys with the most to prove are the receiving cores, other than obviously Steve Smith. They did nothing in the draft or free agency really to solidify the wide receiver position. They're going to go with Steve Smith and then Brandon LaFell and company, and they're still looking for that one guy that's going to step up and sort of be the go-to. I think they will target LaFell to be that guy, to give Cam Newton some more options to go along with his stable of running backs, and of course with Steve Smith. And we'll see how this develops here, but I think could see Cam Newton start to get a little bit frustrated this year if maybe he doesn't feel they're surrounding him with the players he needs to succeed. The last team in the NFC South here is the Falcons, and I'm a big Matt Ryan guy. I think Matt Ryan is just a wonderful player. I think he came into an impossible situation when he was drafted third out of BC after the whole Michael Vick nonsense. He handles everything with class. He's totally turned around that organization, probably turned around what a lot of fans thought of that organization and Michael Vick at one time. And, you know, he has a lot to prove in the fact that this is the year, I think, and he knows it, the fans know it, the organization knows it. He's got to get them to a Super Bowl. He's got to prove that he can get over that hump. Losing a home championship game in general, like they did last year, to me is a serious black mark on a team and more specifically on a quarterback. I think when you lose at home in a championship game, even if they're not at fault, legacy-wise, it's going to fall on the head coach and the quarterback. And, you know, I hope for Matt Ryan's sake, I don't have a dog in the fight in the NFC, but I hope he's there with a chance to get his team to the Super Bowl this year. I'd love to see it. Moving from the NFC South to the AFC West, let's start with the St. Louis Rams. The Rams, the guy with the most to prove on the Rams in my mind is Sam Bradford. Sam Bradford, the last one of these players who received this big bonus when he was picked number 1 overall out of Oklahoma. Much has been made of how he's pretty much been an average quarterback with the Rams, and now this is the second year under Brian Schottenheimer. It's the second year under Jeff Fisher, the head coach. Again, a coach and offensive coordinator that didn't draft him. He has weapons now. They draft Tavon Austin. They trade up to get him. They also drafted his West Virginia wide receiver teammate in Stedman Bailey. They drafted 2 receivers last year in the early round, so they pick up Jared Cook, the tight end from Tennessee. Okay, they pick up Jake Long to improve the offensive line. So I think you see what I'm getting at. They're building a solid team around Sam Bradford, and it's time for him to take the next step. They've been more than patient with him, and it's absolutely time for him to take the next step and prove he can be an upper echelon or at least middle-of-the-road quarterback. The Seattle Seahawks, they have such a solid roster. There's not many guys with a lot to prove. A guy I think, though, based on how his free agency, interest or what have you went, is Cliff Averill. Cliff Averill was a guy I thought was going to get a huge deal. In my mind, he was the best pass rusher available this year in the draft. He signed a 2-year, $15 million contract with the Seahawks, and I know that's a lot of money. Look, for the everyday person, for me certainly, $15 million is a lot, but his market value was thought to be a lot higher than that, and he has a lot to prove where he can play well these next 2 years, and he's still young enough where he can still break the bank on a payday. So let's see Cliff Averill come out this year and prove that he is worth more money than he got from the Seahawks this season. The Arizona Cardinals are up next, and look, the Cardinals, same old story for them. Going into last year, the question was their offensive line. Going into this year, it's the same question. Okay, yeah, sure, they tried to fortify their offensive line in the draft, certainly. Now let's see how these guys perform. Let's see if they perform at a level that really warrants good play from quarterbacks. Everyone was getting on the quarterbacks last year for the Cardinals, and were those quarterbacks awful, whether it was Ryan Lindley, John Skelton, Tevin Cobb? Yeah, those guys are not even average quarterbacks, and you could even debate if they're NFL quarterbacks in general, a couple of those guys. But the offensive line also gave them no shot to do anything, and there was a stretch of games there where between the offensive line and the quarterback play, it was absolutely atrocious.
So let's see how that offensive line, with a lot to prove, with a new coach and a new quarterback, let's see how they perform out there in the desert. The last team, the San Francisco 49ers. Look, this team is absolutely loaded. And as far as someone with something to prove here, let's see Colin Kaepernick do it again. Let's see him show that when teams prepare for him, they're going to have a string of film on him now. Nothing he does is going to surprise them. Let's see him now go to work, get better at certain things he needs to get better at. Maybe his accuracy, maybe staying in the pocket a little more as a passer. Let's see him get better at those things and get the 49ers back to the Super Bowl. That's a lofty expectation. That roster is absolutely loaded. They are absolutely a Super Bowl contender, maybe even the favorites in the NFC heading into the season. I would think them, the Falcons, and the Seahawks will be somewhere in that mix there as the favorite. So let's see Kaepernick do it again and come up big for the 49ers, as he certainly did in last year in his first year seeing consistent time as the starting quarterback. The last division here is the NFC North. And the NFC North will start off, with the Green Bay Packers. And Aaron Rodgers, I don't think he has anything to prove. I personally think he's the best quarterback in the NFL right now. But who does have something to prove is that line in front of him, both from a run-blocking standpoint and a pass-blocking standpoint. Let's see them prove they can open holes for Eddie Lacy, Jonathan Franklin, the stable of running backs they had last year. And they need to protect their most valuable asset a little bit better in Aaron Rodgers. As far as all the good quarterbacks go in the NFL, whether it's a Tom Brady, a Matt Ryan, certainly a Peyton Manning, a Drew Brees, none of those guys get hit or have to dodge as many hits as Aaron Rodgers. Let's see a season where they prove they can keep him in the pocket unscathed and just sit back and marvel at what Aaron Rodgers would do with a situation like that. The Chicago Bears are next up, and the Bears are a team that always seem, their fans are great. If you guys, know a Bears fan, have interacted with Bears fans, these fans are great. They know everything about their team, and, they give every guy a fair shot and are so knowledgeable about the game. And, I think by all accounts, the guy with the most pressure on him coming into this season for the Chicago Bears is Jay Cutler. And he has Brandon Marshall now, who he has an excellent rapport with. Let's see Jay Cutler prove that he can be the franchise guy in a big market, go a full season without any controversies, without anything, weird happening. And let's see him steadily, consistently, both with his play and with his attitude, lead them to a playoff berth and challenge the Packers for that NFC North crown. You go from the Chicago Bears to the Detroit Lions, and I think the Detroit Lion with the most to prove is Ndamukong Suh. And while I don't think he's had bad seasons, I think he has the potential to be an all-time great in the NFL, and I want to see him prove he can manhandle guys and take over games. Have guys focus on him to open up the pass rushing lanes for not only Nick Fairley, but also the defensive ends on that line, and give that secondary a little bit of a break. Again, I know Suh is a good player and he's played well, but I think he has the potential to be an all-world, once-in-a-generation type defensive tackle, and it's more about him reaching his potential as a player in my mind. Another team in the NFC North that's sort of been on everyone's radar this offseason is the Minnesota Vikings with the 2 first-round picks, certainly with the performance of Adrian Peterson last year. And, I think the pressure undoubtedly this year on them is on their quarterback, Christian Ponder. I wasn't high on Christian Ponder when he came out of Florida State. Thought he got drafted way too high. I still don't think Christian Ponder is particularly any good. But, hey, listen, it doesn't matter what I think. It matters what the organization thinks. And they think he is the future quarterback. And with teams heavily focusing on Adrian Peterson, We'll see if that matters this year because they're heavily focusing on him last year. And, look what happened. He rushed for 2,000 yards. But thinking Peterson won't rush for 2,000 yards again, can Ponder, with a relatively young receiving core outside of course, Greg Jennings, can he lead them back to the playoffs? And not only that, can he be a difference maker at the quarterback position for this team? Because, to be quite frank, that remains to be seen. They did not get to the playoffs, despite what Rick Spielman says. They did not get to the playoffs last year because of Christian Ponder. They got there because of a defense that was good enough and Adrian Peterson, plain and simple. And, that's what I see from all 32 teams and groups of guys or coaches that have the most approved this year. Let me know who you think has the most approved this season for your team or for any other team. Hit me up on Twitter @ProFootballPod. That's @ProFootballPod. Catch me on YouTube under the channel name Sports News Analysis. You can catch the over 500 videos I've done on there. And also, guys, the answer to our trivia question from yesterday was, who are the members of the National Football Hall of Fame that are in the Hall of Fame as New York Jets? And the answer to that question is simple because there's only 3 of them. There's 4 of them, actually. There's Joe Namath, Don Maynard, Weave Eubank, and, of course, Curtis Martin, who was the most recent one inducted out of those guys. So, guys, that's my podcast for today, Friday, May 10th. I'm going to be back here on Monday, May 13th, either at 8:30 or 9 o'clock. I haven't decided yet. I'll post the time on my Twitter page and also here on Blog Talk Radio. Guys, have a great weekend. I'll come at you with a new series a new topic to dissect your favorite team with on Monday. All 32 teams talked about every night here on the Pro Football Podcast. And guys, be sure to hit me up by either on social media or via email. Thanks as always for listening. Have a safe weekend. Have a great weekend. And we'll talk to you on Monday evening. Thank you.